guys, Dave Meter 122, and it's list day! This is the last of the Exceed lists, and I'm so excited to get started on it because frankly this is one of the more fun ones I ever had to compile. The cool thing about this list is all the non-generic rank 4 Exceed monsters are all pretty good because Konami felt that in order to landlock you to a deck, you better be damn worth playing in the deck you're stuck in. Which means that the order on this list is a little bit not quite congealed yet because frankly you could order these around all you want, because it's actually kind of hard to determine which one's the best one because they're all so different. In this list, summoning condition is not going to be a huge factor because they're all landlocked to different decks. They're all landlocked to completely different decks that do different things, so it's really hard to compare. The only thing you can pretty much say is if it's got 3 level 4 or 2 level 4, then 3 level 4 is objectively harder. But anyway, let's get started. I'm super excited for this one. Magister Pendulum, the Ascending Draco Slayer. This is a cool one because it requires you to Exceed summon with 2 Pendulum monsters. Which, you know, if you're playing Pendulums, that's kind of the last thing you want to do because they don't go back to the extra deck so you can keep abusing them. But this thing is amazing in Pendulum decks. During the end phase of the turn that this thing was Exceed summoned, you can add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. That's great because Pendulums have been getting bombed on the ban list lately because unless Konami reins in Pendulums, those decks can just be super uber tier 0, so they gotta be very careful with what support they give them and how much of it. In this case, Luster Pendulum's a great one to grab because he's at 1, and he's an amazing Pendulum support card. It also behooves you to play Draco Slayers in a deck that you want to summon this thing in, because that adds a little bit bonus utility to this card. Once per turn, you can detach from this card to summon 1 Draco Slayer Pendulum monster from your extra deck. You can't Exceed summon with it, but who cares? You're probably going to Dynaster or Ignister with it, and that kind of builds us into the next thing, that Draco Slayers are a great generic Pendulum support archetype that you can kind of just shove in any Pendulum deck you want to add consistency and utility, and they come along with a bunch of really good extra deck monsters. Overall, a great support card, not too broken in and of itself, but it really lets you get the ball rolling. JianX. Here's an interesting one because he probably wouldn't be on the list necessarily, except it's 2016, it's fall, and ABCs are a thing. So this thing is an amazing card right now. But in a bubble, he's still very useful in pretty much any machine deck because that's what is required to make him. Once per turn, you can detach from and add 1 machine from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Probably grabbing 1 from your deck because that's less readily available resources, and it saves you a lot of time and resources. You don't really want to grab crap out of your graveyard unless you absolutely have to because you probably have a million other ways of getting those things out, so deck probably most likely. Adds tons of consistency to machine decks, and if you're playing Gyrias, a lot like Draco Slayers with Magister, you get a little tiny bit of bonus utility because when it leaves the field, you can special summon a level 3 or lower Gyria monster from your graveyard to your field. Again, just a great support card, gets your deck rolling, adds consistency. In a bubble, really solid. Doesn't do a ton of it on its own, but it is exactly what you need when you are playing machines. Number 8, Heraldic King Genome Heritage. I had to read that one for a sec. Now this is a really interesting entry to the list because, frankly, half of you probably don't even remember this thing exists. And that's kind of a sad thing because here in the TCG, Heraldics didn't do very well because they didn't get all their support till much past their prime, so now they're nothing more than a pretty solid, competent rogue tier deck, but they do have this thing, and this thing is excellent. Once per turn, you can target one of your opponent's Exceed monsters, make its attack 0, make its effects nothing, steal its name, steal its attacks, and steal its effects. Holy crap, you can target Cyber Dragon Infinity and turn this thing into Infinity, assuming that you've baited out its negation, of course. Ignoring all those stipulations, overall, this is still an amazing card. If you're playing your Heraldics, you happen to be playing against a deck that has an Exceed monster on the field that you can't necessarily readily make, but its effect is kind of useful to your deck, it's awesome that you can steal it. Hell, Heraldics don't mind going to the graveyard, so taking Dante's effect wouldn't be stupid. And zeroing out their attack is great, because that means it's a pretty decent spot removal as well as stealing their monster stuff. And my last point is that name stealing. This is not a mechanic that we have a ton of in the game, changing a monster's name to something else. So that's kind of cool because you could steal Nova and then slap an Infinity over this or some weird overlay crap, and it's just totally not relevant right now, but in the future it might be something fun that you can do with. Ugh, Konami, these names. Number 86, Heraldic Champion Rongangamid. That. Long name, huge effect, almost unstoppable. Mostly landlocked to S-Knights, because it's the kind of deck that would make this thing that can spew a bunch of level 4 warriors to the field. It doesn't necessarily require 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, it's just however many you decide to make it with. 5 max. And the more cards you make this thing with, the more effects it gets, and they all stack, and if you get this with 4 or 5 material, it's next to unstoppable. During your opponent's end phases, you detach from this thing, so none of its effects require the actual use of its material, so they pretty much have to wait 3 turns before they can even start to deal with this thing, and it's probably already won you the game by that point. With 5 or more material, you can just nuke your opponent's board, destroy all cards they got. Doesn't just destroy monsters, doesn't just destroy spells and traps, everything. Holy crap! That's just icing on the cake. Most of the time you're summoning this with 4 materials. That 5, you can get that 5 and nuke their board, they probably lost. 4, your opponent can't normal or special summon. Holy crap, so if they could get something to deal with this, like a kaiju I guess, they can't even play it. They can't summon anything to battle this thing, or to tribute this thing, or to use an effect on it. Nope, they can't summon. They can set a monster face down. Whoop-de-doo. 3 materials. This thing is unaffected by other card effects. Not spells, not traps, not monsters, card effects. Holy crap, so if you could summon something, which you can't, you can't even sack it with their Geki or 101 it or anything. It's completely immune. 2 materials. Wow, you've outlasted this thing for what, 3 turns now, and it's got only 2 materials left. What is it doing? Well, it's got 3k attack. So even if you could deal with it, it's still a humongous monster. With 15 base attack, it's pretty low, but doubling itself when it's got 2 or more material means that if your opponent could find a way out of it, it's really having a good time covering its bases. 1 material. You've lasted this long, and it can't be killed by battle. That's amazing. This thing is huge, and if you can summon this thing, a lot of decks have a really hard time dealing with it. It's almost a game winner in and of itself. Oh boy, it's Trivor. S-Knight's got 2 entries on this list, even though technically the last one doesn't necessarily have to be summoned in S-Knights. Heroic Champions can actually summon it if they want to, but that deck's not very good. But this one is completely stuck in Tellarknights, as that's the only monsters that can actually make it. During the turn you exceed summon this thing, you can't summon anything else but Tellarknights, but who really cares because that's what you're playing. If this card's exceed summon, you return all other cards on the field to the hand. Everyone. Bounce a lot of it, except himself, of course. That deals with so many problems. It doesn't target, it puts it to the hand so it doesn't go to the graveyard and do a bunch of stupid effects, and if you can recycle things like Call to Haunted and Fiendish Chain, so you can just get some utility out of it yourself. Wow, this thing wins games. Tellarknights can just keep abusing the crap out of this thing, and you can't keep a board because it all keeps going to your hand, you can't, so it's just a nightmare to deal with. Oh, and it does actually have an exceed monster effect. When you detach material from it, you can knock a random card out of your hand to the graveyard. Thanks, Konami. I not only did you bounce all my crap, you knocked one of my cards out of my hand, so I'm losing advantage Oh, I finally managed to get rid of this thing, but I sent it to the graveyard with material so it gets its last effect. It can summon one S-Knight from the graveyard to the field, which if you know how S-Knights play, that's all they need to do to swarm the field again. Just get that one special summon off, which is why they absolutely abuse your Call of the Haunted. This thing makes their deck work. It's an amazing card and kept them tier 1 for a very long time. Finally, some older cards on the list. Loggia and Dolkha, the Volzar twins. Solda is a rank 6, so he doesn't count. These two are great, and they had an entire deck called Dino Rabbit built around them. Their effects are amazing. It's a damn shame they're stuck in dinosaur decks because they're dragons, and if they were actually summonable in a dragon deck, oh boy, that'd be a problem. Alright, let's go over him. Dolkha. He's basically a walking Divine Wrath or Solemn Strike. When your opponent's monster activates in a monster effect, you detach one material from this thing, negate the effect, and destroy the monster. Ooh boy, that's an amazing effect, and even now, these two are actually still really relevant. Loggia is arguably even better. He's a walking Solemn Judgment. When a monster would be normal or special summoned, or when a spell or trap is activated, you can detach 2 materials from this thing to negate the activation of that card and destroy it. Like I said, Solemn Judgment. Sure, he uses 2 materials instead of 1, so he blows through his resources quicker than Dolkha, but even still, he's basically a rank 4 infinity, which is amazing. These two would still be relevant if there was a deck that could make them right now. These cards are incredible. Madolche Queen Tiramisu. Tiramisu. It's a pun. This cute little chocolate person is actually an incredible Exceed monster. And frankly, she has one of the strangest effects of any of the rank 4 monsters that we have in the entire game. Once per turn, you can detach one material from her to target 2 of your Madolche monsters in your graveyard and shuffle them into your deck. Oh, great. That's what Madolches like to do. They play from the deck and shuffle in the deck, so it's just how their mechanic works. But you get this bonus little tiny effect that's just kind of shoved in there at the end. You can shuffle into your opponent's deck cards up to the number of Madolches you return to yours. By that language, this thing doesn't target. Let me just let me get that through your heads. Tiramisu does not target. It can spin 2 cards to your opponent's deck. That circumvents graveyard effects, non-targeting abilities. This thing is one of the best spot removals that we have in the game, and sadly it's stuck in Madolches, which is an okay deck, but it's certainly not tier 1, and if they just got a little bit more newer support, that thing would still be an amazing deck, because again, this card is fantastic. Lightning Chidori. Oh, this one's another great card. 2 level 4 wind monsters will let you summon this thing, which is okay because unlike Tiramisu, which requires Madolche monsters, this thing is just winds, which means, sure, there's not a ton of decks that can make it, but there's more because it's an entire attribute as opposed to one archetype. What does this thing do? When this thing succeeds summoned, you can target 1 face-down card your opponent controls and add it to the bottom of their deck. Okay, so it targets, unlike Tiramisu, but it still spins the deck, which is still a nightmare to get that card back. But that's not even the seed monster effect. It actually can detach to do something else, and that is target a face-up card and put that to the top of the deck, which means when it hits the field, you spin a face down, then you can use its effect to spin a face up. That's 2 for the price of 1. That is a lot of advantage you got for simply making a rank 4 play that your harpies could just kinda do. It's what it does. This card is fantastic and actually made harpies a relevant rogue deck for quite a while because this is a really, really solid card to go into. Not to mention you can do it in Yosenjus, Ritual Beasts, hell, I think Magispectors can make this thing. There's a lot of options for this. Not to mention that top decking thing, sure, it means they're going to get it right back, but if you top deck the right card, something they just can't use next turn, you're going to totally brick them for the turn. They're going to draw into something they couldn't summon or couldn't play because the time has passed. Like a BLS, but they spent their whole graveyard. So strategically speaking, this thing can be much better than Castel. Can you tell I'm a Harpy player? Ice Beast Zerofyne. Oh boy, another heavy hitter out of the Wing Beast types. Harpies can make this thing, but so can Black Wings and Raid Raptors, so it's not stuck to wind like Chidori, it's actually stuck to a type, Wing Beast. It's also a water, so that's a weird thing, but who really cares? What does it do? Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card and negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent controls. Every card they got that's on the field right now, its effects are negated. That's scales, that's face-up spells and traps, it's face-up monsters, that's their field spell, everything. And furthermore, this card gains 300 attack for each face-up card currently on the field. Not just the ones that you negated, but including your own, except yourself. That means if your opponent's got a couple of cards, you got a couple of cards, it's really easy for this thing to have like 3, even 4k attack. And none of their stuff has effects anymore. And they don't have effects until your next standby phase. So your opponent has an entire turn where all their crap and the rest of your turn that you use this thing where they can't do anything. That's amazing. It's a humongous problem solver. It turns into a giant beat stick. This thing just gets you out of stuff. It's a great card. Before we get to number 1, we do have some honorable mentions because surprisingly, there's a ton of non-generic, really good rank 4 Exceed monsters. The first one up is Bahamut Shark. On his own, he's kind of okay. He's made of 2 level 4 water monsters, so there's quite a few decks that can actually kind of finagle their way into making this thing. By detaching one of those materials, you can summon a rank 3 or lower water monster from your extra deck. Before recently, there wasn't very many good targets for this thing, probably Nightmare Shark at best. But now that we got Totally Awesome, this thing's totally got a better target. Ugh. That's why he's not officially on the list and only a mention, because it's actually Totally Awesome. That's the good card. He's just kind of a means to the end. But overall, still notable worth. Ooh, Master Key Beetle. Made of 2 dark monsters. It's not the most non-generic you can get. 2 dark monsters is pretty easy to fulfill. And he's got actually kind of a really trolly effect. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from him and target 1 other card you control, and as long as this thing remains on the field, that card cannot be destroyed by card effects. There's an interesting lock you can do with this in Safe Zone. But hell, you can target your own Vanity's Emptiness, which will prevent it from killing itself with its own effect, and your opponent from killing it, meaning you can just completely lock them out of special summoning. Any spell or trap that you have that you absolutely need to keep on the field for your deck to work and your opponent just keeps hitting with MST and driving goddamn crazy, this thing kind of alleviates that. Harpy's Pet Phantasmal Dragon. I am such a Harpies player, it's not even crazy. This card though, bear with me, is actually fantastic. At 3 level 4, it's a little harder to make, especially because Harpies don't really want to expend that many resources on one Exceed play, but this thing is very good. It can attack your opponent's life points directly. Sadly, it's only got 2k attack, but if you could boost it, hey, that'd be cool. And while this thing's on the field, your opponent can't target Harpy cards for attacks or effects. Sure, you can still get Darkhold or Regeki or Mass Destruction, but you can't attack Harpies, including itself, and you can't target Harpies, including itself. And last but not least, for all the honorable mentions, is Bujintai Tsukiyomi. Like Geargant, he's on the list because of ABCs, but he's actually a really solid card, and like S-Knights can run him and things as long as you can make him out of some lights. For its turn, you can detach from this card to discard your entire hand, then draw 2 cards. At first sounds kind of shitty, but then you gotta realize that you're probably gonna use this when you have 1 card in your hand, so you're getting to go plus, and that card is probably one of your ABC monsters, which wants to be in the graveyard anyway, so it's really not a cost, you jackass. Ugh. But just because I'm a little salty about that deck does not mean I can ignore the fact that it's actually a phenomenal play, and makes this card super relevant all of a sudden. Hey, if you actually are that one kid at locals playing Boojins, it does actually have a bonus effect. If this thing is sent from the field to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target up to the number of materials this thing had when it was sent that are Boojins in your graveyard. You can summon those Boojins to the field. So if you're playing Boojins, you get a couple monsters back when this thing dies. That's pretty cool. If this one's a surprise to you, then where have you been? Evil Swarm Ophion. Oh boy, this thing is like the trolliest shit on the list. Act now! For 2 level 4 Evil Swarms, you too can be a giant asshole. Neither player can special summon level 5 or higher monsters. Whoop-de-fucking-do! This thing can single-handedly brick so many decks. Blue Eyes, ABC, Monarchs, Kaiju, pretty much anything in this game that wants to summon a big giant boss monster can't freaking do it. And if you don't have a rank 4 Exceed play to get out of this thing, you are screwed.
Oh, but Davinator, I could just hit it with Regeki. Lol, I'm clever.
No, you're fucking not, because this thing does have an Exceed monster effect. You can detach 1 material from it to search 1 infestation card from your deck to your hand. What would that be, you ask? Infestation Pandemic. It's a mass Forbidden Lance for Evil Swarms. Well, it's a quick play spell card that says all Evil Swarm monsters are unaffected by spell or trap effects this turn. So if you do manage to sack an out to this thing, it can search its own protection. What? You can't even kaiju this stupid thing. Holy shit. This card is probably effectively not power creepable. Really not a word, Dave. But my point still stands. Until the end of time, if this game is being played, some deck somewhere is trying to summon a big dumb beat stick with a big dumb effect, and it's like, oh, I'm a big unbeatable boss monster. Ah! But nah, this thing is just to say, nah, bro, nah. So until this game stops being played, this thing will be a viable anti-meta card. Congratulations, Konami, you did it. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. This list was a lot of fun to do because a lot of these cards I haven't seen played for a while because they're stuck in decks that aren't meta anymore, and it's just really cool to revisit all of them. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, and remember, guys, if you don't troll the meta, who will? I'll see you guys for the next list.